Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into a seriously influential piece of historical and religious text, Maulana Maududi's comprehensive commentary on Surah Al-Hajj, the 22nd chapter of the Quran, from his renowned work Tafsir al-Quran. Our goal here is to unpack the structural and historical themes embedded in this commentary, and we'll see exactly how profound theological concepts are blended with very real, on-the-ground historical shifts.
So, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the context of Revelation, then move into the warning of Judgment Day, check out some logical proofs of resurrection, discuss the purpose and sanctity of the Kaaba, and finally, look at the historical permission for defense. Let's get into it. Okay, first up, the context of the Revelation, and how this chapter essentially bridges two entirely different eras. You know, to really grasp any historical text, you absolutely have to know when and where it was written. And what the commentary points out right away about Surah Al-Hajj is pretty fascinating. It doesn't just fit neatly into one box. Instead, it actually blends characteristics of both the Meccan and Medinan periods of Revelation. And why does that matter to us? Well, because it reflects a massive, pivotal transition for the early Muslim community. They were right in the middle of this monumental shift, and the tone of the text perfectly captures that exact bridge between two completely different eras of their history. As you can see, the text describes a community in serious transition. They're moving from the late Meccan period, which, as the commentary notes, was defined by severe persecution, straight through the painful process of migration and expulsion from their homes. Ultimately, they arrive in the early Medina period, where they're suddenly tasked with building an entirely new, structured society from the ground up. The verses in this chapter speak directly to that anxiety, the hope, and the rapidly shifting realities of this exact timeline. This brings us to our next major theme, the warning of Judgment Day, described here as the earthquake of the hour. Now, shifting from those earthly struggles to absolute cosmic realities, the commentary doesn't just mention the final hour in passing. It heavily emphasizes the overwhelming physical and psychological reality of it all. It actually breaks down the text to describe an apocalyptic earthquake. We're talking about a catastrophic event that completely upends the natural order of the world. The focus is entirely on the sheer, undeniable magnitude of what's coming, effectively shaking the reader out of any sense of complacency. To really convey the gravity of this event, the text uses some incredibly powerful and frankly terrifying metaphors. It states that panic will be so absolute that it overrides even the strongest, most fundamental human instincts. Every nursing mother will forget her nursing child, and every pregnant woman will drop her load. It's a strikingly vivid use of imagery designed to make this abstract concept of Judgment Day feel intensely real and psychologically impactful. But the commentary doesn't just issue a warning. That leads us to the logical proofs of resurrection, providing actual evidence from creation. What's genuinely fascinating about Maulana Maududi's analysis here is how it transitions into highly logical arguments for life after death by actually delving into the science of human embryology. The whole premise is that observing the biological development of a human being isn't just science, it literally serves as definitive, observable proof of a creator's ability to resurrect the dead. The underlying logic is super straightforward. If you want proof of the next life, well, just look at how this life began.
The explanation systematically outlines these specific biological stages. Step 1, starting from basic elements like dust. Moving to Step 2, the sperm drop. Then Step 3, the clinging clot. And finally, Step 4, the lump of flesh. This step-by-step progression establishes a clear, undeniable point. If a higher power can orchestrate this incredibly complex initial creation from scratch, then recreating life, resurrection, is an entirely logical and highly plausible concept. It appeals directly to basic cause and effect. And this point is reinforced by a second, really grounded proof. A comparison is drawn between a barren, seemingly dead piece of earth and that exact same earth blooming and fertile after a heavy rainfall. It's a visible, agricultural metaphor for resurrection that literally anyone could look outside and understand, regardless of their scientific background. These everyday natural phenomenons are presented as undeniable evidence that bringing the dead back to life is already an established pattern in our universe. Now, let's ground ourselves back in physical history with the purpose and sanctity of the Kaaba, the center of monotheism. The commentary spends a significant amount of time explaining the historical roots of the Kaaba, which shifts our lens from the universal down to a highly specific geographic location. It emphasizes that this wasn't just some local tribal shrine. Originally, it was built by the prophet Abraham, purely and exclusively for monotheistic worship.
The commentary uses this history to strip away layers of subsequent cultural practices and bring us right back to the structure's foundational original purpose. The text explicitly details these core characteristics of the Kaaba. Yes, it was built strictly for monotheism, but crucially, the commentary argues that the Kaaba belongs to no single group. It dictates equal rights for locals and visitors alike, and it's meant to be a designated place of ultimate peace and security. This is a radical concept of universal access and sanctity, and it's highlighted specifically to show just how deeply that original purpose had been corrupted by the time the early Muslims were dealing with it. And that conflict sets the stage perfectly for our final section, the historical permission for defense and the establishment of justice. So if the Kaaba was meant to be a place of universal peace and equal access, what happens when people are violently denied that access? Based on the historical breakdown we are exploring, we have to ask, what specific conditions triggered the very first permissions for these early communities to actually physically defend themselves? Remember, they had been passive for over a decade. So why the sudden shift, and how does the text justify this massive change in policy? Well, the commentary explains this turning point vividly, and it definitely wasn't arbitrary. The polytheists of Mecca had aggressively blocked the Muslims from visiting the sacred mosque, directly violating that core tenet of equal access we just talked about. On top of that, they had unjustly expelled the Muslims from their own homes purely because of their beliefs. It was only after these extreme violations of religious freedom and basic human rights that a defensive ruling was finally granted. This brings us to a pivotal quote highlighted in the text. Permission to fight has been given to those who are being fought because they were wronged. This fundamentally frames the historical permission for defense not as some act of unprovoked aggression or conquest, but as a deeply necessary, codified response to systemic oppression. Self-defense is positioned here as a vital tool to establish justice and protect the fundamental right to worship freely, especially when all other peaceful avenues have been violently shut down. To wrap things up, I want to leave you with a final thought to reflect on. We've seen how this commentary weaves together the most abstract cosmic concepts, like the end of the world and embryological proofs of resurrection, with incredibly practical, gritty historical rulings on community defense and human rights. So, how does seeing these two elements side by side change how you view historical texts like this? It's a brilliant illustration of how deeply intertwined spiritual belief and practical societal structures truly are. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the source material. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.